my friends. Here we are once again in our Sunday school class, and it just feels like home when I'm in here. So I hope you've had a good day. This is evening time for us, or late afternoon. And so we're going to do a Bible study today that the longer I studied it, the bigger it got, and it'll be at least 2 lessons. So just be prepared for part 2 comes next week. Let's start with a word of prayer first. Father God, we just come to you today and we thank you for your love and your mercy. We thank you that you brought the sun up again this morning. You didn't have to depend on us to do it, and it comes up every morning. We thank you that your mercies are new when we see that sunshine, and we're just so thankful that every day we have a new chance to worship you and to serve you as however we can. Lord, we pray that you'll be with us, help us keep an open mind and an open heart to see what your word has to say to us today. We thank you and love you for all you do for us. In Jesus' sweet name, and amen. Now, turn to John chapter 4. We're going to talk about the woman at the well today. Now, I did use a book that I bought before Lifeway went out of business, kind of as a basis. Some ideas I used from that, most of it's mine. So anyway, here we go. You know what? Our lives are like a movie. Now, all of us are not the same. We have different type of lives. Some of our lives, if you would have to describe a genre, I know some people who have drama movies. Their lives are a drama movie. Then you got some that it's a constant comedy. There are action movies, and there are mysteries. What's going to happen next? I'm telling you, that could be our family. What's going to happen next? There are some who, people in their family, they are living a movie that's a crime and action movie. But you know what? Some people, their lives are a love story. Now, women love a good love story. Chick flicks are the best. And I don't care if it's Sunday school class or whether it's people you work with, women love a chick flick. You know, some of the ladies in our Bible study, we even met and went and watched the Downton Abbey movie together twice. So, you know, we love a good movie. Now, back in the 70s, talking about a love movie, love story. Some of you all are too young, but that was a box office bestseller. Love story. Oh my gosh. The women were weeping all the way through that. But you know what? Love stories with a lot of drama keep us tuned in. If that was not the case, we wouldn't have soap operas. Now, there's not so many on today, but when I was a kid, you know, I remember when I'd get home, the soaps would be on. Mom would have watched All My Children, you know, and then there was something else, and then General Hospital was at 3 o'clock, you know, and you watched them all, and Dark Shadows came on at 4, and so we watched all those dramas, those soap operas. Every day there was something that would make you go, da-da-da-da, you know. Well, many of our lives are stories or episodes, but you know what? When you read the Bible, it could be a soap opera. They are just as exciting stories there as what's on TV, and they're cleaner sometimes. You know, sometimes you got some pretty risque. David was pretty risque. But you know what? Sometimes when we read our Bibles, we just read the words and gloss over the meaning. Or you might say, well, I'm not like that person. I've never done that. Or I'd never be guilty of that. And I'll advise you to never say, I would never. Because the devil will trip you up on that very issue. I've seen it happen too many times in all my years of teaching that now the star of our movie today is a woman, and probably more like you than you might imagine. So let's read the first 4 verses of John chapter 4. And it says, "When therefore the Lord knew how the Pharisees had heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John, though Jesus himself baptized not, but his disciples, he left Judea and departed again into Galilee. And he must needs go through Samaria." Now, I dug out my handy dandy map, and glad I caught it before it hit the floor, or you would have seen me tumble on the floor. He left Judea, which is down here in the southern part of modern Israel. Jerusalem is in that area, okay? So he was going up here to the north, to the Galilee, and it said he must needs go through Samaria, which was right in the middle. Now, typically, if you were leaving Jerusalem and going to Galilee, you would not go through Samaria. Now, there's some information that we need to pick up here. In verse 3, it says, he left Judea. It doesn't say anything about his disciples, but we know from the few verses down that he didn't leave by himself. The disciples went too, but they departed to go up north. And verse 4 is important, and it's underlined in my Bible, and it says, and he must needs go through Samaria. Now, no Jew, especially a Pharisee, would ever go through Samaria. They did not want to be contaminated by a Samaritan. They didn't go that way. Now, on my first trip to Israel, I found out the reason why. When we flew in Tel Aviv, and we went up the coast, and we went up into the Galilee and spent a day or 2 up there. And then when we started down south, he says, we are not going to go the shortest route, which is through Samaria, because it is hilly, or really more toward the mountainous side. Instead, we'll go down by the Jordan River because it's nice and flat. Now, I am not an athlete, but I'm telling you, I'd walk the flat right by the riverbank before you'd see me climbing the hills to make my trek. It's rocky, it's rugged, it's hilly. Now, I pulled up a picture from off of the internet, and that is part of Samaria. Big cliffs and big rocks and lots of rocks. And so that is not an easy way to travel. So, like I said, the tour guide 3 of my 4 times said, we're going down by the Jordan River. One time, I think it was in 2000, we went through Samaria, and when we were on that bus, it was just like we started out, and it's flat, and then all of a sudden you felt this incline, kind of like when you're on a plane and you start taking off and you go, whoa! Well, that's the way we were in that bus. So, anyway, the geography was one thing that prohibited the travel there, because you had to be young whippersnappers in order to travel that. Now, the second reason is, although the road through Samaria was the shortest road, the Jews avoided it. There was a deep distrust and a dislike between the Jews and the Samaritans. Now, roll back. You know how they do in the movies? They'll flip back and they'll show you what was. Okay? So, if you go back to when the Jews were carried away by Babylon, they took the northern part of Israel, and they carried off all the able-bodied young men, the skilled craftsmen and everything. They left people who were handicapped, people who could not benefit them. So that left nobody really to intermarry with. And so the Babylonians left the lowest classes, the elderly, the handicapped, and so those people intermarried with non-Jewish people. You remember? They didn't clean out the promised land like God told them to. They left Canaanites and Hittites and Jebusites, all these people. And so they intermarried with these Samaritans, and so they were not a pure Jewish race. So these non-Jewish people marrying the Jews became the Samaritans. I thought it was interesting. The word Samaritan comes from the root word shamar, which means to keep or guard. And those Samaritans actually did keep the land because they were the only ones left. And so while the rest of them were off in Babylon or Syria, these people kept the land. Now, the Samaritans, their faith was a combination of the commands and the rituals from the law of Moses put together with superstition. You remember that's where they married outside of the Jewish race, and so it was a skewed version of Judaism. Now, pious Jews would call them half-breeds, and they despised them because of their morphed religion. The Samaritans built their own temple on Mount Gerizim. When I did some research the other day, I found out that the Jews burned that temple on Mount Gerizim because they said God did not authorize it. But at this point, when Jesus comes to this area, it had been more than 150 years earlier when that temple was burned, and so they had reconstructed it. Now, the pious Jews would rather take the longer route, and doing that, in fact, they actually crossed over the Jordan River and came up the Jordanian side, as it is now, and then they would get up north and cross back over because they did not want to contaminate their shoes. But Jesus says in verse 4 that he must needs go through Samaria. Now, the need was not because of the travel arrangements, but why do you think he needed to go there? Because there was somebody, and I think a lot of somebodies, that needed to hear his message. You know, the Samaritans stayed in their neck of the woods. The drama between the Samaritans and the Jews were so bad that they just stayed put where they were. They never wandered out of their neck of the woods, and they didn't want to get into trouble, because they were so despised. But Jesus knew there was a woman who desperately needed to hear his message. It made me think. I was sitting at work, and sometimes I have some free time, and so I was working on my lesson, and I thought about this. It's a Southern gospel song, and it was written by a good old West Virginia boy right up the road from us, Squire Parsons. And this is written, you could just say the chorus came right out of this story, even though I know it wasn't. But the words to the song, He Came to Me, it said, the gulf that separated me from Christ my Lord, it was so vast, the crossing I could never ford. From where I was to his domain, it seemed so far. I cried, dear Lord, I cannot come to where you are. And the chorus is what's so important. He came to me. Oh, he came to me. When I could not come to where he was, he came to me. That's why he died on Calvary. When I could not come to where he was, he came to me. The second verse says, he came to me when I was bound in chains of sin. He came to me when I possessed no hope within. He picked me up and he drew me gently to his side, where today in his sweet love I now abide. He came to me. Oh, he came to me. When I could not go to where he was, he came to me. That's why he died on Calvary, when I could not come to where he was, he came to me. I know my voice is shot. It's a rheumatoid arthritis flare and it attacks my throat. But anyway, that woman would not go to where Jesus was, but he saw the need in her life, so he came to her. Verse 5 and 6. Then cometh he to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near to the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus therefore, being wearied with his journey, sat thus on the well, and it was about the 6th hour. So Jesus arrives at Sychar in its high noon. Now, the time is different. It says there that it was the 6th hour. But you know what? They started counting the day when the sun came up. And that typically was 6 o'clock. So 6 hours around, that's high noon. So he arrives at high noon. Now, one thing, and I don't even know why I did this, but I do this all the time when I travel. I thought, I need to know how to dress when I go places. So I always see where the latitude lines run from where I'm going to go. So I run it around the world to see where it lands in the United States. So in the middle of Israel, you run it across through there, and it is in northern Florida and southern Georgia. Okay? If it's in the spring through the fall, it is hot. I've been to Israel 2 times in the middle of February, one at the very end of February into March, and one time in April. You never want to go to Israel in April. It's way too hot. And so if this was any of those times during the year, high noon, it's going to be hot. Now, I guess I have been an old person for a very long time, but I can't handle heat. And so older folks and those who don't tolerate the heat like me, you get up early and go outside and work while the sun is not very high. And so the heat is not oppressive. Now, you cut the grass, you do weeding of your flowers and your gardens, you do your yard maintenance, you feed your animals while it's not hot. I used to get up and go out about 7 o'clock, 7:30, and I could have all my flower beds weeded and my roses and all that stuff. Everything was weeded. And then about 8:30, 9 o'clock, I was ready to cut grass, and the neighbors were awake, so I wouldn't bother them. But here it is, high noon, and we find Jesus arriving at Sychar at the well. And so he sits down on the well. Well, a hole, we think is a hole in the ground, but you know, they always built a little wall around it so people wouldn't fall in it, okay? So he sits down on the wall of the well. He's tired, he's thirsty, he's hungry. We find this a little later on. But the main reason, he's waiting for the reason that he must needs go there. You know, we used to laugh about it. I worked on a computer back in the early 70s when computers were a new thing. And we had an IBM System 3 Model 10. And that thing would be churning around, you know, and even when we were printing invoices, all of a sudden there would be an error pop up. There was a little window and it had an error code that popped up. And so after you did it a few times, you knew if this certain code, you know, you just dialed it to a 0 and hit, you know, the go button. And so one time we were running it and gave this weird code. And so I said, Connie, I don't know what that code means. And she said, I think it says I'm hot, I'm tired, I quit. And so, you know, that's what, when Jesus saw that well, he got that code, I'm hot, I'm tired, I quit, because the main part of the story is coming up. Now, it says in verse 7, there cometh the water of Samaria to draw water. Jesus saith unto her, give me to drink. for his disciples were gone away to the city to buy meat. Then saith the woman of Samaria to him, How is it that thou, being a Jew, asketh drink of me, which am a woman of Samaria? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. Okay, so she shows up. Now, it's a strange time to draw water. Just like me going out to weed my flowers early in the morning, that's when the women typically came to get their water that they needed to cook their meals with. It's like, it's so much easier when it's cool. You don't want to do it in the heat of the day because it would make you get overly hot, overly tired, and you couldn't get all your chores done. But it's the best time to do your work in the morning while it's cool. Okay, so why noon? Why did she show up at noon? Well, I read in this one place it said, well, she fit the term of unlucky in love. Now, we'll find about that more later. But whether she had been shunned by the people or not, because, you know, she had been married several times. Anyway, she felt like an outsider. Her life resembled a modern day reality show. Now, there's a TV show, it's in reruns now, but it's called Scandal. And you know what? There is a scandal. There is more twists and turns than you can imagine. And it is full of scandals. And so, anyway, when you think about this woman, she is an emotional mess. Now, if you've ever been through a divorce, I have. Even though you may not be the guilty party, he said it's better than it's ever been. I'm just not happy. Okay? You'll find that people pick sides. Even in church, you'll find difficulty because your friends are sitting as couples, you know, during church, and you feel so very alone. Widows feel this way too. And sometimes when they pick out sides, you know, they don't talk to you because they've picked their friends with your ex or your soon-to-be ex. Then there are other people who they just don't know what to say, so they avoid you like the plague. And it could be various reasons why she did not want to go when everybody else was there. It could have been because she'd been talked about, she'd been insulted or bullied. We don't know. Women sometimes have a long tongue and they can be very, very cruel. But to her, the thought of facing the women in her village was more painful than she could bear. And so she decided to go when they would not be there, which was the hottest part of the day. So as she travels there, she's getting hot and sweaty and tired. You know, they wear those veils and stuff like that. That's hot. I could not be a Muslim. I would roast under all that hijab. I could not do that. And the burqas, I would have air holes cut everywhere. I just couldn't do that. But anyway, she walks on the path to the well, and she is totally shocked by what she sees. There is somebody there, and it's a man, and to top it off, it's a Jewish man, and he is alone. That is a big deal. Now, you know, we talked in verse 3, it said he left Judea. Well, verse 8 explains where all the disciples were. They had gone into the city to buy meat. And so they've gone to buy go boxes of food. You know, I'm telling you, the pita bread there is just way beyond anything you can get here. But anyway, so here she is walking up to a Jewish man. And I'm sure the differences in the clothing is what tipped her off, that he's Jewish and not Samaritan. Now, ultra-Orthodox or very, very strict Jews, they justify gender separation to varying degrees. Now, there's a series of law in the tradition of the elders that forbids interaction between persons of the opposite sex who are not married or closely related. They are not allowed to have physical contact. In fact, I read one place where nowadays, even in the ultra-Orthodox sections, even like New York City, that the men walk on one side of the street and the women walk on the other side, separate sidewalks. But a man is never supposed to speak to a woman. I found an article that came from the New York Times in January of 2012, and it says, every woman who passes a man's field of vision is sized up on the basis of how much her body is covered. She is seen as a potential inducement to sin by a man. They must be covered and sequestered so that men do not have improper sexual thoughts. They are made to dress modestly, and that still may not be good enough. A woman may think she is dressed modestly, but if the man deems that she is not, he may even spit on her as a sign that she has violated the law of the elders. The women are made to wear a scarf or a wig over their hair because they consider a woman's hair as sensual. They're kept separate in the synagogue. When we were in the synagogue, well, the remains of the synagogue in Caesarea up in Galilee, when you walk through there, they say, now there was a section around, on the back side of this, where the kids and the women stayed. The women were not ever allowed on the main floor of the synagogue. The women had to be in the balcony. And you know what? It's still that way in the ultra-Orthodox synagogues. There is a part of their oral tradition that says, a man who spends too much time talking to women, even his wife, neglects the study of Torah and will inherit Gehenna, which is hell. So they say, you're not supposed to spend time with women, even if it's your wife. You spend too much time with her and you're neglecting the law. So here she is. She walks up and here's this man, and he says, what? Jesus saith unto her in verse 7, give me to drink. He asks for a drink. What a no-no. It's not supposed to be like that. He is not supposed to talk to her. It's bad enough he's not going to talk to a Jewish woman, let alone a Samaritan. Here's what he should have done. He should have kept silent. He should have refused to look at her, and he should have backed away from her. They were treated as though they had leprosy. I have a friend who says, because of the COVID that's going around now, you're afraid to even speak to anybody, and sometimes when you come on somebody like at Walmart that you may walk up toward them and they may back off from you. And she said, I feel like I have leprosy. That's what the 6 foot, social distancing makes you feel like. You feel like you're unclean. You should yell, unclean, unclean, stay away, even though you're not, contaminated. But anyway, by him asking her for a drink, he has defiled himself as far as the Jews are concerned. Then he asked for a drink from a Samaritan cup. That would never happen. She probably, I can imagine if that would happen to me and I walked up there and he didn't get up and turn his back to me or whatever, and instead asked for a drink of water, I would have probably stepped back from him, because I know that's against the tradition of the elders. And she says, you're a Jew. What are you doing asking me for a drink? Surely you know that we have nothing to do with each other. And so, you know what? I love Jesus. He offers love and acceptance to this woman by demonstrating his willingness to drink from her cup before offering her a drink from his. Verse 10 says, Jesus answered and said unto her, if thou knewest the gift of God, And who it is that saith to thee, Give me to drink, thou wouldest have asked of him, and he would have given thee living water. Wow. If you had only known who you're talking to. If you only knew. Have you ever come across somebody and you think, oh, I think I know them. Who is that? And they start talking to you like they know who you are. And it's like, oh my gosh, where do I know them from? Is it from church? Is it from the state auxiliary? Is it from where we sing out, as a trio? Where do I know this person? And you're just going, And so she's so confused. And then he says, if you only knew. If you only knew. Verse 11 and 12 says, The woman saith unto him, Sir, thou hast nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. From whence then hast thou that living water? Art thou greater than our father Jacob, which gave us the well, and drank thereof himself, and his children, and his cattle? She might have even kind of chuckled to herself and said, Buddy, you don't even have a bucket to dip with, and this well is deep. Where do you think you're going to get living water? When you're parched, there is nothing any better than a good cold drink of water. Now, on my first mission trip, I went to Uganda. And so we stayed at an orphanage outside of Jinja, and there was a witch doctor who had taken up squatters' rights there. And so when Wayne and Bonnie Sue went out there, they said, we bought this land, you're going to have to skedaddle because this is our land. And we're going to build an orphanage out here, and we're bringing the kids. And he said, I'm going to curse this land, and you're not going to have any water, and you're going to bring these kids out here, and they will die. So you know what they had? They had about over 200 kids in that orphanage at the time in town, and so they went back and the kids prayed and fasted. And so they had a team from Samaritan's Purse that came over and helped them when they drilled their well. And you know what? They went down about 50 feet and they hit water, abundant water, but they drilled on down to about 150, 200 feet. And they took a sample of the water and had it tested, and it was pure water. Never, when you go out of the country, do you ever drink tap water. You never drink water unless it's bottled. But you know what? That water was so pure, we turned on that spigot and we drank water right out of the ground. And so if you're hot and parched, there is nothing like a good old cold drink of water. And so, she's probably laughing, and she says, this is the well of our ancestor, or our father Jacob, who himself drank of it. This well sustained him, his sons, and their flock. Surely you don't think you're greater than him. Verse 13 and 14 says, Jesus answered and said unto her, Whosoever drinketh of this water in this well shall thirst again. But whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst. But the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life. The literal water had to be continually, the bucket had to be thrown every day, maybe more than one time a day, to have enough water for them at their house. And so that they had to come back the next day. They had to go back every day to get water. But the water that Jesus promised would be a permanent spring within the person. This is an eye-opener for the woman. Now, Middle Eastern countries are often in want of water, and they may even appear as a desert. Part of Israel, I was never so shocked when we came, down the Jordan River, and I was shocked at how small it was. But, when we got down there to the Judean wilderness, it was like there were goats wandering around feeding Bedouin had them out grazing, it's like there's no grass there. There's nothing green. There's just dirt and rocks. And you say, what do they even eat? And they said, well, they'll knock the rocks off and there'll be little plants underneath there. And they dig, they go down far enough that they find some water way deep. But you know what? It was so, I don't know how in the world they live in an area like that. But our souls are like that. They are deserts, and it thirsts for happiness and joy and peace and contentment. And people seek that, and they try to get the happiness and the fulfillment with using wealth and pleasures and drugs, alcohol, sex, and so many other things to try to satisfy that thirsty soul of theirs. And you know what? I heard a little old lady back in the early 80s. She was from Missouri, and she came to speak at one of our retreats. Her name was Eunice Edwards, and she said, our hearts are made with a vacuum. There's a little part of our heart that's empty, and only God can fill it. We can try to fill it with many, many things, but only God can fill that spot. And when he comes in, we get satisfied. Until he comes in, we are never satisfied. We are always thirsting after something to satisfy our soul. But when we ask Jesus into our heart, we will be satisfied. There is no sense of want. Now, I went to Amish country not too long ago, and I got on Facebook, and I've started following a couple of Amish pages, and I found this Amish proverb, and it said, letting go of earthly possessions enables us to take hold of heavenly treasures. When we get a hold of Jesus and have him in our heart, the things of this world, they lose their appeal. Now, there's still, people still like nice homes and all that stuff. It's not that you shouldn't have adequate housing and clothing and all that, but the desire to have more, it loses its appeal. Of course, I play piano here, and I think of this song, this world is not my home, I'm only passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. This world has a lot of things to offer, and I am a blessed woman for being able to travel and be in so many different countries and to share God's word in so many different places. And so, you know what? There's nothing. I'm telling you, I was saved when I was 10 years old, but when we had a revival here for our 50th anniversary as a church, we had Willie Mae come and preach. And I'm telling you, never experienced a revival like that ever before or ever since. And you know what? Every day you got hungrier and thirstier for the Word of God. That revival lasted 13 days. And you know what? It fits this passage because the New Living Translation of verse 14 says, but those who drink the water I will give will never be thirsty again. It becomes a fresh, bubbling spring within them, giving them eternal life. You know what? By the middle of the second week, I felt like I'd been saved all over again. I couldn't wait to get here. Well, for a service that started at 7, you had to be here at 6 to get a seat. People were sitting in folding chairs. They were sitting in the floor. You couldn't find a parking place to park. You had to walk for blocks in order to find a place to park. But you know what? What a refreshing, you feel just like you've been saved all over again. Well, you know what? Studying this, I felt like I got saved all over again. My spirit just was bubbling up within me. That living water is still there. But you know what? That was such a foreign concept for her. You know what? They had a system of rituals. There was no spirit then. And religion was doing the same old things. And you know what? If we're not careful, same thing happens today. We'll come in, we'll have an opening, we'll sing a song, we'll say a prayer, we'll have another song, preacher will preach, out we go. And it's flat like pop that's been sitting in a pop bottle over in the fellowship hall for months and months and months, from the time we quit ladies' Bible study on Tuesday night at the end of May until we start back again in September. You know what? You leave pop sitting that long, it's flat as a flitter. And he says, you can have bubbling water? What a switch. You know what? Our life may seem humdrum, but you know what? God is moving when we don't even realize it. And so verse 15, it says, the woman saith unto him, Sir, give me this water that I thirst not, neither come hither to draw. She says, give it to me right now. It showed the condition of her heart. Did she totally understand what it meant? Maybe not, but she was searching for something more than she had. If you're searching for something more than you've got right now, you can head to Jesus. And if you can't go to him, he'll come to you. Then it says in verse 16 through 18, it says, Jesus saith unto her, Go call thy husband and come hither. The woman answered and said, I have no husband. Jesus said unto her, Thou hast well said, I have no husband, for thou hast had 5 husbands, and he whom thou now hast is not thy husband. In that sayest thou truly. Wow. She'd had 5 husbands. She's living with a man that's not her husband. You know, anytime I've ever heard this preached or taught, they always jump to the conclusion that she was a promiscuous woman. You know, I don't believe that Jesus' words that he said to her were hurtful or shameful. I think his words were full of empathy and compassion. We don't know why she had had so many men, but here's some possibilities. She may have been widowed. You know, in the first century, families arranged marriages for their daughters, often at 13, 14 years of age. I read, you know, I'm a big reader, and I remember getting a National Geographic years and years and years ago, and it talked about nomadic marriages. And it told of a story where a 2-year-old girl was being married to a 70-year-old man. How sick is that? But now this wasn't Jewish, but it was a Middle Eastern, culture. And so anyway, you marry a 2-year-old to a 70-year-old, he's going to kick off, And so the life expectancy was not what it is today either. So the man might have died early. They also observed, I can't even say it right now, but it's where the brother of the deceased man is obliged to marry his brother's widow. And so she might have married this old man as a young woman, and he died, and so she has to marry on down through the family until there is a child produced to carry on her first husband's name. This is done so that the land that the original husband could be preserved in the family. He would be the protector of that dependent family. Now, any children born by that brother carried the name of the first husband, and so his name would not be blotted out of Israel, but carried on. Fathers' names are very important. If you fly into Israel today, I've done this 4 times. Every time you fill out that piece of paper to go through customs, you have to put your name, your address, and all that stuff. You have to put your father's name. They want to know who your dad is. It's important to them. Okay, so you never know. She could have been widowed several of those times. She could have been divorced. Now, in 2000, when we were in Israel, we always had a Jewish tour guide and an Arab bus driver. And our bus driver, Atas, said Bedouin men could have as many as 4 wives. But if one of these wives did something to make him mad, whether it was to burn a meal or whatever, He could go to the main tent peg of his tent, and all he had to do was put his hand on there and say, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you, and it was done. She would be sent away, and it was such a shame that her parents wouldn't allow her to come back home. Well, where was she supposed to go? You remember this really did happen. Hagar. Sarah got mad because Hagar had a son, and it made her mad because she wanted that son. And so she sent her away, and that's what those Bedouins do. Now, here's another thought you might not have ever thought about. It could have been because she was barren. A woman's value depended on her ability to produce a male heir to care for the family and to carry on the name. If the woman did not produce children, she carried shame. You remember Hannah? She was so grieved that they found her at the altar and they thought she was drunk. She was so grieved that her words were not even making sense. Sarah, she ended up offering Hagar so that there would be a son. Even Elizabeth, her husband was a priest, and yet they had no sons. Their hearts were heavy because they had no children. And so in Jewish law, the husband could divorce the wife can't divorce the husband. So any of these divorces that she may have gone through was at the request of the husband. And she would have been left abandoned in a harsh culture with no financial means and no male protector. You remember, if you read back in the Old Testament, they would put stones on the edge of their property, and if you had a bad neighbor, and after you became a widow, that neighbor could move your landmarks, and they would just squeeze you out of your land, and they would just absorb it until you had nothing. But a woman had no legal rights, so she couldn't even fight in a court of law. So that's the reason why producing a male child was so important. But you know what? When that happens, those Jewish women felt as though no one wanted her because nobody ever stayed with her. Samaritans, remember, they followed the same law of Moses, so the same practices, only some of them were skewed. Now, any woman that's ever been through a divorce, like me, may have heard, it's better at home than it's ever been. I'm just not happy. And you know how hurtful it is to go through that divorce. You feel like a failure. You lose your self-esteem. It's hard to hold your head up. You feel like you're of no value to anybody. And the longer you are by yourself, you question what's wrong with you that nobody wants you. You think, what's wrong with me? I've never been asked out, and I think, well, what's wrong with me? I don't think I'm that dog ugly. Why? But you know what? It didn't take very long that I was satisfied. I don't need a husband. I've got Jesus. He is all I need. But you know what? When women ended up like this woman, after you have been so desperate, you get a man that'll come along and show you some attention. And she just moved in with him. But I think Jesus, he didn't call her out for her sin. You know what? Just like we talked about last week, those branches that went down toward the ground and they got dirty, he didn't cut them off. He reached down, washed them off, and lifted them up. And that's what he was trying to do to this Samaritan woman. He did not rebuke her, even though what she did was wrong. Living with a man that she was not married. There was a woman who was taken in adultery, and the Pharisees, they wanted to stone her. And Jesus just leaned over, and he started writing in the sand, and he said, those of you without sin, you cast the first stone. Wonder what he wrote in the sand. Could it be the word grace or forgiven? We don't know. But you know what? He doesn't shame her for her past. Jesus' words were so revealing that they were about forgiveness of sin. She had a void that needed to be filled. Whatever areas you have in your life that may seem stale, God can revive them. He can bring new life to your heart. If you turn to Isaiah chapter 12, verse 3, it says, "Therefore with joy shall you draw water out of the wells of salvation." The joy of the Lord is our strength. It's not for us to be refreshed and to get all stirred up again and just feel like we've been saved all over and then set ourselves on a shelf again and stagnate. That's not the goal. Jesus wants that bubbling spirit of ours to be shared with other people. And so remember this, that whosoever drinketh the water that I shall give him shall never thirst, that the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life. Bubble away this week, girls.